Teenage pregnancy during the decade of the 1970s rose by approximately 50%. Teenage gonorrhea tripled between 1956 and 1978, and both those trends are still continuing. And the fourth stage, the cure for all of this, sex education. And now we come to a current example, the healthcare situation, or the healthcare crisis, I'm sorry. Now, how do we know that there's a healthcare crisis in the United States? Because the president has told us again and again. The president's wife has told us. The media have told us. What more could you want? Now, one of the statistics they throw around is that the United States spends 14% of the GNP on health care. No reason is given why a higher or lower number would be better. Particularly in a country which is growing older and wealthier at the same time. Germany and Japan are held up as models because there they only spend 9%. I'll get back to Germany and Japan a little later. One of the confusions is the confusion between health insurance and medical care. And the second confusion is between medical care and health. We already have virtually universal medical care in the United States. The poorest soul in these United States who passes out on the streets will get medical care. He may or may not pay the hospital, but he will get medical care. The other thing is confusing medical care with health. There are tremendous differences in longevity within the United States. Mormons in the United States have a life expectancy a decade longer than the average white American. Is this because the Mormons have extraordinary medical care? Or could it have something to do with the fact that they don't drink, they don't take drugs, and they don't go around shooting each other? Now, the favorite explanation for any problem in Washington is that our society has failed. And so prenatal care is held up as one of the ways of reducing our infant mortality. One of the faster ways of reducing our infant mortality would be to collect the statistics the way they do in the countries we're compared to. Which is to say that when a very underweight baby is born in the United States, all kinds of medical treatment are given to that baby. And when the baby dies in spite of that treatment, that baby becomes part of our infant mortality statistics. In many other countries, no such effort is made to save that baby. And when that baby dies, that is counted as a stillbirth, not as infant mortality. So it's much faster to reduce infant mortality that way to make ourselves comparable to the people we're being compared with. A couple of years ago, there was a study which showed that prenatal care was not as common among blacks as among whites, and that there was a higher infant mortality rate among blacks. The immediate conclusion was, clearly, it was one thing was the cause of the other. Again, being sort of battle-hardened about these things, I sent away for the study. And on the very same page where the statistics showed that blacks had higher infant mortality rates and lower prenatal care, it showed that Mexican Americans have even less prenatal care than blacks and lower infant mortality rates than whites. And if one were to thumb a few pages on, one would discover that Americans of Chinese, Japanese, and Filipino ancestry likewise had lower infant mortality rates than whites and less prenatal care. The conclusion I would draw is that there is no connection between prenatal care and infant mortality. But of course, that's not a politically popular conclusion. There'll be a lot of bureaucrats out of work if we start thinking that way. Getting back to Germany and Japan. In Germany and Japan, people have more doctor's visits for the same disease and shorter visits each time. So one of the ways in which you can bring healthcare costs under control is to have someone go to the doctor 10 times for half as long instead of 5 times for twice as long. That way your statistics will show that you have brought healthcare costs under control. Now, if you're an elderly person who has to stand out on the street in the winter waiting for a bus 10 times instead of 5 times, you may not fully appreciate the good that's being done for you. One of the confusions that runs through the whole healthcare issue is the difference between controlling costs and controlling prices. Let me look at some of the cost differences that exist. An American doctor pays 14 times as much for malpractice insurance as a doctor in Germany. Nothing that the administration has said is likely to reduce that cost. In fact, given the political support of the Trial Lawyers Association for Bill Clinton, I doubt seriously if that cost will be reduced at all. Controlling prices is something very different. Nothing is easier than to control prices. You issue a law saying it is illegal to charge more than X for product A. They've been doing this not only for centuries, but literally for thousands of years. The Emperor Diocletian, back in the days of the Roman Empire, had price controls. Had exactly the same consequences as price controls under Jimmy Carter. Diocletian's reaction was very similar to Jimmy Carter's. He wondered why people were so greedy. Now, one of the reasons the United States has higher costs is that we have better health care. It was fascinating to watch the president say that we have the best health care in the world. Yes, the best does cost more. You can always pay less and get less. But only by going through the government are you likely to pay more and get less. The United States has the lowest death rate from cancer of the stomach, cervix, and uterus of any country in the world. It has the second lowest death rate for breast cancer and from heart attacks. There are more than twice as many CAT scanners per capita in the United States as in Germany, more than 3 times as many as in Canada. What's fascinating in all the discussion of health care is that the entire supply side is ignored. I don't know where these doctors are going to come from that are going to give us this greatly increased medical care that we're demanding at the government's expense. For example, there are something like 8,000 doctors from Canada alone practicing in the United States, partly as a result of the wonderful Canadian health system that we're being asked to imitate. Correspondingly, there are large numbers of Canadian patients who come to the United States as a result of the wonderful health care in Canada that we're being asked to imitate. I was up in Spokane this spring, and they mentioned how all the people who come down from Canada to be treated. That is, they pay their costs down to the United States in addition to paying for medical care here that they could get free in Canada. One of the people who did this was the Premier of Quebec. I told them in Spokane, just wait a while. After a while, we'll have our healthcare system, and Americans will be going up to Canada. Over a period of about a dozen years, something like 15,000 doctors came here from India alone. So we have a very large medical contingent in this country from around the world coming here to enjoy the free conditions of the American medical system. Of course, if we make our system just like theirs, many of them will probably decide to go home. What's really lacking in so many areas is a lack of knowledge of the role of prices. There's a notion that prices are just things that people set up arbitrarily on their own. I call it volitional pricing. You decide that you want to charge this. Some prices are high because people are greedy, and other prices are low, presumably because they're not so greedy. When I was teaching at UCLA, I used to tell the people, if that's true, then it must be that proximity to the ocean increases greed, because all the housing prices near the ocean are far higher than they are inland. As you go east into the smog, why, the prices go down. And it seemed to me that proves that smog is an antidote to greed. Unfortunately, this theory has not yet been recognized. There is no sense that prices are conveying some underlying reality. In fact, I have a book coming out this fall which is called Is Reality Optional? And unfortunately, among many intellectuals, the answer will be yes. Now, some years ago, when I taught at Brandeis, I traveled from California to Massachusetts and discovered that my auto insurance rates had doubled. And since Los Angeles is not a small village or something, you wonder, why does that happen? Now, at about the same time, many other people were upset because Massachusetts had the highest auto insurance premiums in the country. The political answer was not to say, why are these premiums so high? What fact are they conveying? But it was to control the premiums. In fact, they launched an investigation of the insurance industry, the net result of which was they discovered that insurance companies were losing money in Massachusetts, charging the highest auto insurance premiums in the country. Now, anyone who's ever seen Massachusetts drivers will know that there's no mystery as to why those premiums are so high. The only place where you can regularly see drivers changing lanes in the tunnel during the rush hour is in the Callahan Tunnel in Boston. When I taught at Brandeis, I can recall driving to work on the right-hand side of the street and being surprised to see a tractor-trailer pass me on the right on the shoulder of the road. The only place where I've seen emergency vehicles with their sirens on, having to jam on the brakes because someone did a left turn in front of them, is in Massachusetts. But of course, people didn't want to hear what the prices were telling them, and so the answer was to control the prices themselves. There have been many other areas in which there have been price controls. They have a standard, really stereotypical pattern. One is that you reduce the supply of whatever is being controlled. Not surprising, since people do less when they're paid less. The other is that you reduce the quality of what's being controlled, because higher quality is costlier than lower quality. And when you force the prices down, people then reduce the quality of what they're producing. One of the classic examples is housing. Wherever rent control has been put in, there is a shortage of apartments. In many places, there's a provision in the law that says this is only a temporary measure until the housing shortage is over. And sometimes they define that in terms of some percentage of vacancy and so on. And what they don't understand is that as long as that law is on the books, there will always be a shortage, and there will never be a time to take the law off the books. In Paris, they put a law like this on the books as an emergency measure during World War I. It was still in force when World War II broke out. In Sweden, they put one in the early days of World War II. Decades later, it was still there. Finally, for some reason, it occurred to someone to take off the price controls. Instantly, there was a housing surplus. The housing projects put up by the Swedish government suddenly began to have high vacancy rates, and in fact had to be bailed out because they couldn't fill them. I thought about rent control a few years ago when I visited West Berlin. It was still a difference in those days. And I could see this marvelous new modern city. And I came back and visited some of my relatives in the Bronx. And as I drove into the Bronx and I saw all these hulks of abandoned and boarded up buildings, I thought, suppose someone from Mars had come down here and you said to him, which of these two cities was bombed during World War II? He would pick the Bronx, because Berlin had recovered from the bombing, but the Bronx had not recovered from rent control.